the ability to have all that data lying there. And this is a whole level beyond this, oh, let's have a pretty pie chart. This is smart analytics coming from a platform. And that takes us to another thing that Chicago's really proud of, which is a smart data platform. So have folks heard that we got the award from Bloomberg Philanthropies? Mm-hmm. So, all right, so we'll get sort of the medium story here. So the end of last summer, fall, whenever, Mayor Bloomberg, through Bloomberg Philanthropies, issued a challenge. And he sent it out to all the mayors in the US, and he said, give me your best idea. And when I'll take some of those ideas, and the ones I think are the best, and Bloomberg Philanthropies thinks are the best, I will then fund them. So what does Mayor Emanuel do? He sends a note to all of the commissioners, and he says, well, you give me your best ideas, and there'll be sort of a bake-off of the commissioners in the city. So I guess secret number 3, I'll tell you tonight. I am a competitive person. I want to win. So I submitted my idea. And my idea was based a lot on the work I've done at the police department. So people know I did prediction at the police department, taking spatial data, and trying to find ordering in that data. So the idea coming into this challenge was, how do we think about the city as a whole? People have heard me say before, you know, cities are ecosystems. Like, we all agree with that. Well, if you don't, just wait. But within this ecosystem, there are a series of ecosystems. And we have data from all of these different pieces. How do you unravel how it works? So I wanted to take the idea of how do you deconstruct systems like 311 and find the ordering within those? How do you tie 311 to 911 to business licenses? How does a bus route change what's going to happen in a fixed environment? So we proposed to the mayor, really the proposal was based on 2 things. One, how do you create a platform which can handle enormous spatial data that's unstructured and be efficient? We with Windy Grid have really solved the, you know, few hundred million pieces of data, but how do you take that to 10 billion? How do you take it bigger than that? How do you make sure it's efficient? But then on top of this foundation, how do you find these relationships? How do you find that if you do X, you prevent Y? Because the mayor's mandate has been stop reacting, instead prevent, right? That is smarter government, and that was our proposal. And hey, the mayor picked ours, and we submitted it to Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we became a semi-finalist. We got down to the top 20, and they sent us to New York to Ideas Camp, and it was sort of, how do you make your ideas better? Because I'm really not good at describing things sometimes. Like, if you give me an hour, I can describe something. The 30-second soundbite, not good. This is why we don't do live TV. So we went there, and then we took our idea, we made it a little better, we expanded on the use cases, and then guess what? We won $1 million. And that is amazing. Chicago won $1 million from a philanthropy to develop a big data analytic platform to do business smarter. And better yet, we've committed to making it open source. And that's really exciting. And so, like, Tom and the team are right now working with Carnegie Mellon and University of Chicago on making this happen. And Chicago's going to be at the front of sort of this next generation of leveraging data to do this. Right now, we are very good at doing singular relationships. How does X impact Y? And we'll talk a little about that in sort of what we're doing today. But how do you scale this to take this idea of a smarter city and do it throughout all of the complex multivariate relationships that occur in small fixed places? Because as a large city, different parts of the city act differently. And that took me a bit to wake up to. Remember, I'm from Boston. I don't know this whole big city thing. Came here, I'm like, oh yeah, there are going to be magic bullets. There are no magic bullets. So great. So one of the things that we're doing now is a project called CityScan. And CityScan is a relationship, it's an algorithm that comes from our relationship with the Carnegie Mellon Parent Detection Lab. And this is going to end up being part of the framework for how the Smart Data Platform will work. So we're going to talk about rodents. So the picture has finally made it back in the deck. So I talked a little bit about this at my City Club presentation. And so, okay, so this is funny. So walking through my City Club presentation with my press person, and she saw the picture, which Sean right there had put in. There you go, Sean. Everyone just stared at him. She's like, "You're going to show a picture of a rat during a lunch talk?" So the rat is now back, though, because I figure everyone's eating. We're okay. People feeling good about the rat? Okay. So the idea behind CityScan is you take the behavior of the census blocks in the city and you look for relationships. It's how does a certain behavior tie to another in space and time. So let's talk about rats. So what the algorithm found was that in certain blocks, when there's a 311 call for a broken garbage can, that within 7 days, there's an increase in rodents. So that's interesting. That's interesting for two reasons. One, it only happens in certain blocks. This gets at my point that different parts of the city behave in different ways. So when you talk about bigger units of analysis like neighborhoods or cities or wards or all of that, you're diluting the point. But two, there's this idea of being able to prevent, because remember I talked about the mayor's focus on preventing rather than reacting. And that was when, after we got the Bloomberg award and the mayor was on MSNBC, he said that is the prime goal of using data better. So we can do things smarter and we can prevent and get out of the order. So with this rodent example, imagine how solving these problems changes things. Because a traditional system like 311 is a batch system, right? I call in, like I am not into the whole graffiti thing. So I call relatively, actually I use SQL fix. So I batch it in, right? There is a service level agreement in which a city commits to getting rid of things by a certain time. It's dealt with as sort of an entity on its own. But what happens when you start to understand this relationship? So right now, Ryan is working with Streets and Sand on how do we take this knowledge from an algorithm and say, how do we do business smarter? How do we replace a garbage can potentially faster and prevent an increase in rodents? So it's the simplest of examples, but imagine all of this data, all of these points that occur in space and time. What happens when you find all these relationships? What happens when you have that knowledge which lets you do business smarter? And you have that available. So start to think about the Chicago model where one, you're bringing it all together. Two, you have it rapidly accessible. But on top of it, you're starting to get information from your data. You're starting to understand, one, what is the ordering of the different pieces? If I do this, can I prevent that? But two, what is normal versus abnormal? When you have millions and millions of different inputs a day, how do you sort of decide, I need to worry about this? How do I prioritize? How do I do it smarter? How do I make sure every dollar that we spend is spent in the smartest way? And this is the type of model that helps you get there. And that has become part of the business. And here's the thing. This comes from an academic partnership. This is not some big commercial product that we bought. This is not my team, but my team collaborating with academia for things that we built, we own, and we implement. And it's really, really exciting because you can see the future of how we're going to do business here. Now, this is the part where, like, I need to really say thank you to a lot of people. Things that we've seen over the past couple of years. Open 311, right? So Open 311 was kind of a rough project. I think Code for America is great. Like I mentioned Jen before, she's been a really, really great partner. Obviously, Smart Chicago has been great, but we have something, the Motorola CSR system. We've had this in place since like 98. Well, obviously here somewhere. Oh, there you go. So it's an older system, and the mayor wanted to implement Open 311, and it was hard, but we did it. And we now have that in place, and that is part of the foundation. And this was a great example of engaging an organization like Smart Chicago, coupled with this fascinating idea of Code for America, another one I'd never heard of, to change that, and it became real change. Then there are these other sort of interesting things which are going on the academic side, and I've sort of touched at this in a couple different ways. So some of the best work I've done in the prediction space has been with Carnegie Mellon, and that's been, I think 5 years in the making. But at the same time, look at all that we're doing in Chicago. We have the Urban CCD program, which comes out of U of C. U of C has been an amazing partner, and beyond sort of the obvious technical partnerships, an idea that's really come, and you see in Urban CCD, and I think many of you know Charlie Catlett, is this idea of how do we bring together the social sciences with the computer sciences, with machine learning, with all of these different pieces. Because as someone who went to grad school for computer science, I know we think in our little world, right? Technology can solve everything. I've actually said many times, I don't need theory, it's fine. But what we've learned, and one of the things we started looking at really early on in the administration, is bringing the lessons of social science to the world of machine learning, because we have tools to help test things. How do you bring a new tool set to more traditional social scientists? Like if you look at classical social science literature, there are certain techniques that are used. But then if you look at more modern computer science work, wow, there are techniques that might be a little helpful. There might be techniques that sort of get at the challenges of something that might require a parametric test. And as we bring these worlds together, we can start to do new things. So through University of Chicago, we started to create these partnerships where we have people who we never thought would sit down and talk to each other, sharing ideas, collaborating. And I guess, and I know people are nagging to me to sort of talk about some of the things I'm doing after the next 22 hours. One of the things, like people know, I'm going to be spending some time at the University of Chicago. One of the projects I'm really proud of and happy to be involved in going forward is they're developing a dual degree in what? Public policy and computer science. That is awesome. Think about the people coming out of this program. You think about, we talk about things like CityScan and we talk about big data, and then we talk about who's going to work in government in 5 years. Who is going to work on these hard quant problems going forward? Well, this is what we're doing. We're bringing together these disciplines which you won't think are obvious. And that's something that we're in Chicago. And that's how we have a government that believes in this. We have academia who's jumping into it. And then we have the community that supports this. So we've been able to bring all of those different pieces together. And then we have interesting projects like the Open Cloud Consortium, where it's an academic cloud where they have everything from NASA data to data from the Open Data Portal. It's Dr. Bob Grossman, and I talked to him, and I have this crazy idea on this whole weather thing, and I'm not gonna. We'll save that for next time. Might not be a next time. Anyhow, but he's bringing. I want to look at the role of weather with a variety of problems, and in OCC, he's now brought in all of the weather data from the country going back decades. And it's all there, and it's on the cloud, and it's available. These are problems we can now solve in a way back in the day you never thought you could. And these are partnerships which don't cost the city anything. It's instead a philosophy where we're working together. We realize we have shared interests, and we're able to collaborate. So it's really, really exciting. And then, of course, as I mentioned out front, there's you guys. Like, there's many people in the room who I've talked about ideas. I'm going to pick on Joe because he's in the back. Joe and I had we had lunch. Joe Olson, right in back. Everyone can just, there you go. Now everyone knows who Joe Olson is. Oh, well, there's Corey too. Oh, Corey. Last week we were talking at lunch about a way of doing 311 better through using a classifier method via Twitter. Like, these are things that are now coming from this community. So all of these different things are really exciting and really innovative. And I always mention 1871. Like, 1871 is something the mayors watch very closely. A couple of years ago, people talked about startups in Chicago. What do you mean? There's an innovation in Chicago. Go to 1871. There are great ideas there. I've done office hours there almost every month, and people come to me, and I'm like, wow, that is a great idea. A couple of them are, well, actually, a couple of them are terrible ideas. But anyhow, but we now have a hub where these really smart things are going on. And we're having all of the pieces that just show how far we've gone in the past 2 years. So when you think to sort of, I want to skip to talk about the future. So when you think of the future, there's a couple things that